Hello and welcome to another Modern League video here on ModernNexus.com. As always, I am Ryland, also known as Holy Shamgar on Twitch, and today we're going to be playing a little bit of Dredge. I've been screwing around with Dredge a little bit this week and a little bit with the week previous. Sort of with Thanksgiving interrupting me, I haven't had like full 2 weeks of testing with it, but we've been fiddling around with it on stream. Trying some fetch lists, trying some fetchless lists. And this is sort of what I've been trying most recently. I'm still not sure about the list. There's a lot I want to change. It's still really rough and dependent largely on other lists that I have seen. I haven't really changed much yet, but here's sort of where I'm at the moment. The deck has performed pretty reasonably for me so far. But this is sort of what we're working with. So we've got the fetchless mana base. I have enjoyed that more than the fetch mana base thus far, which is a surprise to me. I was particularly interested in playing with a fetch mana base, but just the ability to consistently cast all of these weird things, especially the Narcomoebas and Prize Amalgams, I think is just far too valuable. If you play the fetch mana base, you can play your Steam Vents, but it's just not as smooth as this. I've been really happy with this, and there's really not that many angers around right now, which is really one of the big things that rewards you for playing the fetch mana base. So we find ourselves with 8 sort of Utopia lands that sort of have some drawbacks, counters on our Gemstone Mine, and painting ourselves with Mana Confluence. We've got 5 Copperline Gorges, but the 5th one is instead a Pain land, and then 3 Blackleaf Cliffs, green being very important to make our Loam engine work, since that can produce black later. If you find yourself with a hand of Cliffs, or Cliffs Mountain, Cliffs Salvage, whatever, you need to take a natural draw to find a land to really get yourself out of that, whereas if you have like Gorge Mountain or Gorge Salvage, you can Loam sort of into the other mana sources that you're looking for. So then we've got, as far as enablers are concerned on 1, we've got Neonates and Lootings to pitch those Dredgers, as well as get some draws to get those Dredges going, and Dark Blast, which is sort of an enabler and a Dredger in its own right. I've enjoyed having the Dark Blast main since it sort of fills both roles. Sure, sometimes you take it out, but sometimes it wins you the game on its own. For anyone who's really unfamiliar with this deck, I guess I haven't described the mechanic of Dredge, which is just if you would draw a card, it says here, instead you self-mill yourself, so put cards from your library into your graveyard equal to the number following Dredge. So in this case, Dredge 3. So instead of drawing a card, you would take 3 cards from your library, put them in your graveyard, from the top of your library, that is, and then instead put this card in your hand. You do that from the graveyard, of course. So we find ourselves with a variety of Dredgers. Again, these were the primary enablers on 1 here, but we also have Golgari Thug, which lets us dredge 4, Stinkweed Imp to dredge 5, and Life from the Loam to dredge 3 and return some lands. Sometimes you do hard cast these things. Loam in particular, obviously, you cast with some frequency, and then you'll find yourself casting Thugs and Stinkweed Imps in weirder spots as well. Cathartic Reunion, one of the more powerful, obviously, enablers, being able to pitch 2 cards up front and then draw to dredge a bunch. Pretty happy to see that. It's a big part of this deck. As far as enablers are concerned, past that, we have this 1 Brutality. Pitches some cards, obviously has some modes we're interested in depending on the matchup. And then sort of our payoff creatures here as well. I guess I should mention that this is somewhere between an enabler and a payoff. Right, it allows us to pitch cards, but also to sort of generate power and toughness on board, which is our point altogether, right? Getting board states of these in play quickly is definitely something that, you know, the primary thing we're trying to accomplish. Getting as many Bloodghast, Narcomoebas, and Prize Amalgams into play after dredging them is the goal here. And then Conflagrate is our other payoff, ways of dealing with board states that get a little bit clunky, right? There's no evasion on Bloodghast and Amalgam, and they're not particularly large, but Conflagrate can certainly clear the way, or just dome your opponent for the remaining damage that you need. In our board here, we find ourselves with a few different options here. The additional Dark Blast for the matchups where that's outstanding. Brutalities for when you sort of need to take a peek at your opponent's hand, Anger the Gods, Settle the Wreckage, whatever. it's a way to sort of do that. Some lists will play Thoughtseize, and the one problem with not playing Thoughtseize is that there's a lot of hate you can't take with Brutality, right? You can't take Rest in Peace. You can't take, you know, Grafdigger's Cage or Spell Bomb or Relic or whatever, but Thoughtseize can do that. So I'm not convinced I love all Brutalities yet. I think there's probably a mix I'm interested in. I think the main deck Brutality is fine since it sort of does the job of slotting in there while also being a reasonable main deck card that's also an enabler. I think that's fine, but I might end up wanting these to be Thoughtseizes at some point, and at least in some number. I'm just not sure yet. But Brutalities obviously are excellent in matchups where you're wanting to 3 mode them anyway, right? Burn, Coco decks, stuff like that. So not 100% sure about these one way or the other. Decays are obviously great here. You can bring them in when you're expecting all different kinds of hate, right? Which is one of the reasons that Decay is so wonderful. You can blow up Cage, Rest in Peace. It still hits all the creatures you're worried about. It hits so I mean, it hits problematic creatures and problematic permanents, whereas Revelry only hits like problematic artifacts and enchantments, which still covers much of it, but it's hard to side Revelry in when, you know, your opponent has Meddling Mage or whatever else that you also want to be killing. Revelry is sort of a necessity here to hit things that Decay doesn't, things like Leyline of the Void, stuff like that, while still hitting Rest in Peace and Cage and the usual suspects. Driven Despair coming in matchups where either we really need the Menace off of Despair, rarely casting Driven, by the way, but it does come up. Either Despair for Menace or Despair to clear our opponent's hand in a grindier matchup. And start to finish, I haven't really found myself loving. We'll see if that continues, but it's just sort of another removal spell and one that we can comfortably dredge over. Similar to Vengeful Pharaoh, which I also haven't been in love with currently either. Something I have very much liked in the past, but currently have not been very happy with. Lightning Axe has been outstanding, filling the role of killing problematic creatures while also being an enabler. Definitely love those. Grudge, wonderful, obviously, is another answer when you're expecting to deal with problematic artifacts specifically and not having to worry about things like Rest in Peace or Leyline or whatever, just dealing with cages and relics and all that good stuff. And then Surgical as our sort of graveyard hate of choice. If we found ourselves playing the Mirror a lot, Leylines would be much more appealing as they are also incredibly hard to deal with and basically win the game on their own, whereas Surgicals are just pretty annoying and don't necessarily win the game on their own. But Surgical's easier to sort of fit into our board in a number of 2, right? If we were playing Leylines, we wouldn't really feel quite as comfortable with 2. It just sort of depends on the meta, right? I could see wanting Leylines, but for now I think Surgicals is fine. So that's sort of what we're running with here. We've got some other options that I've sort of already described a little bit. I guess we will see how it goes and then sort of follow up with that later. I hope you enjoy the games, and I guess I'll see you in just 1 minute.